The first of our panelists is Chris Newell. Chris Newell is an educator, children's book author, and multi-award winning museum professional. He was born and raised in Matamikuk. I practiced this beforehand and then I messed it up. Chris, you'll have to say it for me again later. Or called Indian Township in Maine. He is a proud citizen of the Passamaquoddy tribe. Chris's education career began immediately after high school as a substitute teacher during his time as an undergraduate at Dartmouth College. He earned his interdisciplinary bachelor's degree from UConn in 2015, which propelled him back to educating as a profession. He served for 6 years as the education supervisor for the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center. Chris and his museum colleagues co-founded the Accomaut Educational Initiative as a response to the observations in the public school system and the lack of representation of Native history and social studies. Our next panelist is Elsie Gonzalez. Elsie Gonzalez is the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at the Capital Region Education Council in Hartford. Previously, she served as the Assistant Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion at UConn's Hartford campus and the Director of Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives Programming at UConn Stores. Elsie has had a long career at UConn, including 15 years on staff and getting her master's at the UConn School of Business in 2016. And last but not least is Sage Phillips. Sage is a UConn senior, double majoring in political science and human rights with a minor in Native American and Indigenous studies. As a young Penobscot woman of the Wabanaki tribe, and as a newly named Harry S. Truman, Udall, and Cohen Scholar, Sage has made it her mission to make land-grant institutions like UConn a better place for Native and Indigenous students. She's the founding president of the Native American and Indigenous Students Association and the student coordinator for the Native American Cultural Programs. So enough of me. We'll turn it to our panelists now. So my first question is for Chris. Chris, the adoption of Indigenous Peoples Day at UConn is relatively new. Can you share your experience from when you were a student at UConn? Was there any Indigenous student collective action during that time? And do you feel like Indigenous students were recognized by the larger UConn community?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for that question, Kaylee. So I'm actually one of the older ones here, but I was an undergrad, finishing in 2015 on the UConn campus. And previously, my first round going for an undergrad was at Dartmouth College. Now, when I got to Dartmouth, that was my first real experience at an Ivy League institution, and spending time living off reservation. And it was at Dartmouth that, Dartmouth formerly had the Indian symbol, for their sports mascot back until up until the 70s. They had gotten rid of it, but in the 90s, it was still present on campus and especially at the sports games. And honestly, that was the very first time I had ever run into Native sports mascot culture. And what I realized while I was there is that I'm there with these promising young people that are in college. They're going to become the next leaders of our communities and our states and other places. And the level of knowledge they have about me as a Passamaquoddy was just basically on the generalized level of Native American, American Indian, or Indian, Dartmouth Indian, right? And that was it, and they were just stuck there because they were lionizing the sports mascot culture. So that really raised my awareness to, the amount of lack or the lack of education about Native peoples just in general in this country, and how there was just kind of a collective ignorance, in non-Native communities about us. When I got, I traveled for the next 20 years with the Mystic River Singers and went all over Indian country, US, Canada, spending time in Native communities, getting an education that I just could not get in a college, but when I did want to get myself back into educating as a career, I chose UConn. And one of the reasons why I chose it is because back then in the catalog, I think it was around 2011, 2012, I was looking in the catalog, there was a Native American Studies minor on the UConn Stores campus. And that attracted to, because of what I was doing in education. The BGS degree is interdisciplinary. That attracted me a great deal. So I could get the BGS major and then I could get the NAS minor. And I thought, great, perfect. This is the awesome thing for me. And I looked at the classes. They were so interesting, film studies, all of these types of things. I enrolled at the Storrs campus and quickly found out that none of the NAS classes offered in the catalog were actually happening. There was nobody to teach them. So right away, even as an older student, I felt like I was just invisibilized completely. Now, the Native American Cultural Program did exist, but it was very, minor. It was a very small group. And another thing that really kind of irked me was the Native American Cultural Program was put, and this is something that is, Sage and others have been working so hard and have actually achieved progress on. The office was a closet, and it still is. It's going to be changed very, very soon. That can fit probably at max 4 people, right? And that's where the Native students had to gather. That was our space, and not exactly welcoming, as a Native student on campus. So the environment felt like I was in this vast sea all by myself, even though there were other Native students on campus. And I can say that other students that have gone since that time have had that same feeling. UConn is a big campus, very vast. The basketball culture is huge, and it gives it a national spotlight. But back then, I can say that as a Native student, there was obviously attempts to try to right the boat, but for some reason they steered off the wrong way, and everything got left behind. And the only place I could take Native Studies classes were at the Hartford campus and at the Avery Point campus. And so I did a lot of satelliting during my time away from the Storrs campus as a result, but not able to finish with the NAS minor back at that time. And that is it was a very frustrating experience for me, and really propelled a lot of my momentum into post-graduation into really helping the student atmosphere for Native students on campus. And I've been an ally of the students on campus ever since.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. You've been incredible. You've helped us year after year after year. You're there for us, and we so appreciate that, really. My next question is for Elsie. Much like the protests that brought the adoption of Indigenous Peoples Day in South Dakota and in Berkeley, students here at UConn were instrumental in the adoption of Indigenous Peoples Day on our campus. Can you share with us, from your perspective, what actions students took to get Indigenous Peoples Day recognized on UConn Storrs campus?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kaylee. And Chris, it's so good to see you, hear your voice, and know that you're doing well. When Chris shared his history of his connection to UConn and NACP, I put like quotations in my notes, because when I sort of arrived, when I arrived at ODI, Office for Diversity and Inclusion, in 2016, we had the same issues, right? The minor was kind of dormant because we didn't have the faculty to teach it. The students were still in what they call the armpit of the student union, or on the floor of the cultural centers, because they were like kind of behind places. And there were about 4 to 5 students who were allies of NACP, not even students who identified as Native or Indigenous, trying to keep it alive. And essentially, one of the things that they were really passionate about was getting signatures and getting other students from the cultural centers and on campus in the union. They did a lot of tabling, getting their names and in their petitions, because at the time they were student organizations. So 1 foot in a student organization and 1 foot in the Department of Office for Diversity and Inclusion gave them a lot of flexibility to manage their ability to convince administrators to change things, to move things along, and also get the support, not just financially, but also the support from an office that's reporting to the president. So our inaugural Chief Diversity Officer, Joelle Murchison, at the time got together with Jeremy Teitelbaum, who at the time was the provost, and together wrote a message to the UConn community acknowledging Indigenous Peoples Day in support of like the students, right, that were petitioning the work and petitioning that voice being no longer being invisible on the campus. And those conversations, you know, with the Chief Diversity Officer and also the provost really got to be very more often, right? They had access, you know, to the Chief Diversity Officer and access to the provost and access to the president's office. So that alone, you know, to Chris's point, I think, and I believe in, and you know, and the students can correct me if, you know, if I'm wrong, but I believe that that was the energy, right, and the fire behind all of it, their voice and that access, right, at the table with, you know, folks that could make the decision, that could open up spaces, that could change things, that could hire faculty members, that could have folks, you know, be present and available to the students. When I got there, right, the cultural centers were just transitioning from student affairs over to the president's office, and it so happens that NACP, the Native American Cultural Centers, was being really supported by the Director of Student Activities. Dr. Christine Wilson was a godsend to the students as well. At the time that I guess I would say I inherited the supervision of the students and that program, Christine was very involved and had a graduate student at the time, you know, supporting the program with the students that were very involved. And they even like presented a report to me and to Joelle at the time, where, you know, where they essentially mirrored a mini cultural center, right? They had programs, they had meetings all the time, they had a report. I could even send it to you, so it could be like on the archives, because I still have it. The report that they did, the programs, the signature programs that they had, you know, film series, their book club, you know, they together resurrected the powwow that had also, you know, gone on a hiatus for a while. And I think it was a 5 or 6 year hiatus before they came back. And these students really, you know, connected with the incoming students, which is how I crossed paths with Sage, because at the time the admissions office were, you know, giving us information about, you know, who are the students that are identified as Native or Indigenous. So the students that were working in the program, and with Christine's help and Joelle's help, we reached out to them and invited them to the, you know, to the mini center that they had, to sort of welcome them and let them know that there's a space, you know, that we wanted them to know it existed and that we were here to support their identities and really celebrate them for who they are and what they could offer and bring, you know, to the campus with those identities that have been invisible on the campus. And it was just so heartening, you know, to just see them working so hard and being supported. I know that it feels like a long time, but when I joined you all and I've heard sort of where you are now, that's huge. And you know, with Chris being here saying, you know, that until 2016, like things kind of were the same, right? Like from when he left, the room was the same. The students are still working really hard, but I mean, you've made a lot of change, and I'm so proud of you, Sage, and the students that have been working on there. I connected a couple of weeks ago with Catherine Kimberly, who initially was one of the students that was working in NACP, and also you know, Harmony Knudsen, who was the president of the NACP student organization a couple of years ago. These students really mobilized the campus and re-energized you know, what we know to NACP to be now, right? Like social media blew up, like all their programs have been, you know, sort of archived in a different way. One of the things that I remember being, you know, just very prominent for them was the powwow, right? Like just, you know, having that come back to campus, having that be a signature event that revitalized the community, you know, led folks to understand what it's like to be Native and, you know, what it looks like to celebrate indigeneity. That was just very powerful for the students and for the campus. And also, you know, working in collaboration with Chris and Adonis, we finalize a land acknowledgement. The students, you know, finalize a land acknowledgement statement for the campus that didn't exist before. And that process was just a lot of work as well. Chris and Donis, the folks from the Dodd Center, really helped us with the archaeological dig, right? And the historical search of our, what is now, the University of Connecticut, that land, and all the campuses. The students really wanted that work to be, not just like recognize Indigenous Peoples Day and call it a day, right? But call it a day that we are understanding our history, acknowledging the land, and creating spaces at the table for these voices to transform what the organizational culture that is the University of Connecticut.
Fantastic. Thanks. It's so nice to sort of hear it recounted from you. I was sort of there, but not in the office. So it's great to hear that history and have that for us to carry with us. And that's part of what we're doing here in this panel. Mm-hmm. So Sage, the next question is for you. We've heard, from Chris and Elsie about former students' actions and experiences. I'm hoping that you can speak a bit about your experience as a Native student at UConn and your work at NACP to make Indigenous perspectives more visible.
It's my favorite question to answer. It's so good to be here with everyone, especially Chris and Elsie, who I've worked with so much over the last few years. I'm so honored to work with them. And I know I can speak on behalf of all of us at NACP and NASA that we really are lucky that we have you in our back pocket. So thank you. So I guess to go way back, when I came to UConn in the fall of 2018, which is crazy to think about, I kind of came in with the intention, I knew what NACP had and what it was made of, which is what I really wanted to fix and I wanted to address. So I got right up and I went to the involvement fair in the fall of 2018. So eager to find the NACP tables, the only one I was looking for. And I got there and I was told to go to craft night or book club, which is totally not what I was willing to sign up for. And craft night in and of itself sounded like a bit of a problematic thing to me. So I decided to sit that out. And I kind of just let myself, coming from Maine to Connecticut in and of itself was enough of a transition to handle for that first semester of college. So it wasn't until the following spring that I decided to finally get in contact with Elsie. And I think I remember saying something along the lines of, I was invited to these, club nights, but I want to get involved and I want to do the work. And I'm really passionate about my culture and I want to be able to showcase that here at UConn. And it was amazing. She luckily hired me pretty much on the spot. I was able to go to Portland, Oregon on behalf of NACP. It was my first NACP task, which was huge. And ever since then, I've kind of just had a passion I've seen what the other cultural centers are capable of and just a passion inside of me wanting to make NACP become that, if not more. So definitely, I've spent a few tired years now at NACP, but I wouldn't trade them for the world. People always ask me, do you wish you had gone to a college or university with, a well-established Native community? And the answer is no. I had that opportunity and I waved it off so that I could kind of help, as our good friend Sandy Grande once said, carry the labor of institution building. And that's what I've been doing. So the one thing I found with NACP though, is we didn't have many Indigenous specifically identifying student involved. Students were a little confused whether they belonged to NACP or PERLAC, Puerto Rican Latin American Cultural Center, which, at the time administration had really said, you're not making much progress forward in terms of expanding your representation because you don't have a lot of students, which, it was fair, but how do we address those claims and statements and issues, if you will? So that's when I kind of got a small group of students together and I said, we need a student organization. And on top of that, we'll have representation, but we'll also have funding. And I believe at the time, one of the conversations going around was that the union had kind of threatened to take away the closet if we were not a recognized student organization, which did not sit well with me at all. I don't know how you could possibly take more space from Native and Indigenous students, but it was a real threat. And, already having the passion to start the org, that was even more of a drive. So NACE's first year was actually last year, and we created it as the Native American and Indigenous Students Association. And to our surprise, but maybe not so much looking back, we had all of these students coming who identified as Indigenous. And they were just so grateful that I remember myself and our Vice President, Zoe, kind of had a little moment after our first meeting with tears in her eyes and just being like, this is what we've been trying to do. We knew we had these students. It's all about giving them a place to display their voice and express their culture, and also be in community and just foster a sense of reclamation if it's needed. And that's exactly what we did. So NASA has picked up a lot of momentum. We have a lot of students involved. It's so awesome this year that we finally get to meet and be in community in person. But we also at NACP, we have a bunch of initiatives going on. Zoe has created a youth mentorship program that helps foster relations with local Native youth. And our hope with that program is that it serves as a pipeline to get these students interested in UConn and showing them what we can do here, what they can do here. And then we have of course, our Indigenous faculty cluster hire that shows those students even more that, there is a spot for you in higher education, and you have people here who are willing to support you, but also they're going to be here now to teach you. I know as Indigenous students, we often bear the task of being the teacher in classroom spaces, especially when the professor wants to speak about Indigenous issues. It's like, okay, Sage, you said you're Native. What do you know? So it's really, we've come so far since Elsie was so graciously willing to hire me, and it's been a very taxing yet rewarding experience to just kind of look back at this timeline we have laid out. And just to kind of speak to what Chris was saying about the minor, I was fortunate to enroll in the minor and have classes offered. However, I did not have a class taught by a Native or Indigenous faculty member until this past spring. The other courses, some were great, some were a little bit more on the problematic side of things. And there was a point in time where, Chris, I feel what you're saying with, I was a little unsure of if I would even have enough courses offered to be able to complete the minor, which luckily I am, so that's really cool. But, there's always room to grow. And I think that's also part of what the new faculty is trying to address. So it's just been a crazy ride, and we still have so far to go, but it's amazing to look back and see the progress we made, and just be able to thank everyone who's really supported us along the way, and just foster a community for our future ancestors is something really special.
I just want to respond quickly, Kaylee, so to a couple of things that that Sage said, because it really just, brought like warmth to my heart. So when we met, it was just very moving, because one of the things I had learned about, by attending the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity was those connections to indigeneity, ancestors, right? And like really honoring our land, and that being very difficult, and like systemically how higher education is structured. And I wanted Sage to see Native faculty presenting, nationally, and see other students that were working, other Native students that were working, in Native cultural centers. I'm like, go to all the tracks, go to all the programs, and then let's connect for ideas, right? So that we can I wanted her to feel, that she wasn't alone, although that UConn, was a place where, Native students were not, it was a smaller number, that there was a national movement, right, of folks that were doing this work together, and how much support we were gonna have, and be willing to do it with her. When Sage, you mentioned the policies about like the closet almost being taken away. Wow, it brought back like sadness, because the reality was that's true, absolutely, and that it's because of the way that the space and the student space was organized, and I guess voted on in the student union. So like the student union spaces were for student, like active, quote unquote, active student organizations. And in order to have an active student organization, you needed to have membership, you know, and in those, and attend all these trainings and do all these, you know, things, you know, to keep your space. And it's almost like a list of students that are waiting for space in the student union. And we were at risk because we didn't have the membership. We didn't have the numbers. We had like the officers, but then you needed a membership. But the good thing about us was that you know, the Native American culture programs fell under the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. So that basically like put us in a hiatus somewhere, you know, that didn't allow that to happen. But had, you know, the program not been connected in that way or supported in that way, then it would have been a bad look for the university, and really, like, you know, something that I could have seen different types of organizing, or perhaps walking to Gully Hall for demanding the space, because it looked different. But then again, that's, you know, systemically like what is sort of in place, right, for things to happen. And to Sage's point, like, you know, wow, are we going to take away more space from Indigenous people? Really? That's very moving.
Just thank you for that. And just to speak on what you say about membership, I remember starting NASA, and there was a deadline for, you needed 8 members to be able to like submit the org and be considered to be an active student org. And we were scrambling. I mean, we couldn't. I was asking friends like, hey, you don't even have to do anything. Can I just put your email?
Put your name down.
I mean, and then, you know, I ended up not doing that because I was like, you know, I don't want to like scam anybody. This is not what this is about. But it almost came down to that. And Sammy and I just went through the roster this morning. It's, you know, we have to verify every year, and we're up 50 individuals who have joined NASA. So I mean, it's all about fostering community and showing them that there is a place, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I'm so proud of you. That's so great.
So I want us to just like take 1 second to think, you know, a little broader than UConn, and then we'll bring it back. So, you know, as I noted at the beginning of the panel, there's been exponential growth in recognition for Indigenous Peoples Day, both nationally and locally. Panelists, what effects do you see from this growing recognition for Indigenous peoples in this country, politically and otherwise? And this is for any of you to chime in as you feel comfortable.
I'll jump in first, and I'll say it's pretty amazing. As you said, the growth has really been exponential. And as a Native educator, I can say that my workload for Indigenous Peoples Day has grown exponentially, you know, along with that. But that's a great thing, you know, because there was a time, you know, especially in my father's history, where, you know, even speaking of his language, he was told by his teacher, you'll never amount to anything by speaking that language. You know, and 70 years later, this country sees him and has designated him as a national living treasure because of the work he's done to preserve our language. You know, so you know, the creation of a holiday, or at least a recognition of Indigenous people, you know, which has been so glossed over by the creation of nationalist holidays like Columbus Day and like the Thanksgiving holiday narrative, not the holiday itself, but actually the narrative that got placed along with it, you know, are really kind of nationalist holidays that kind of gloss over, you know, the effects of what this country has done to, you know, Indigenous populations here. You know, there's a story. I mean, Connecticut is the birthplace of reservations, and we don't teach that. You know, we teach the reservation system beginning in the 19th century. It's when the federal government did it, but it began in colonial Connecticut, and that's why the oldest reservations are located in Connecticut. You know, so by having these events and by getting me out there and other fellow, you know, educators constantly, you know, out there, what we're doing is we're really, you know, representing ourselves authentically. We are educating, and we are showing a presence in contemporary America, which, pop culture America would relegate us to the past. When I worked for the Pequot Museum, it was not uncommon for even the parents to ask if the Pequots were still alive while in the Pequot Museum with a Pequot educator leading their tour. They're just not making the connection, So the increase and the visibility and the authentic representation that is done through the effort of the Indigenous Peoples Day movement has really raised the profile. And now we're starting to talk about not the surface issues so much. We're starting to really dig down into the things that can actually, help, which is good allyship. What does that actually look like? All of those types of questions, because it goes beyond the land acknowledgement. If that's all you do is just create the words and say the words, they're just words. Right. So, when we worked with Elsie and others, to get that going, it was really about, for us and on our perspective as Egamount, what is UConn going to do after that? Right. And what you're seeing right now is the fruits of that labor here and the force of Sage Phillips. I just want to give, some props there because her, Harmony, and others have really been instrumental in the exponential growth of Indigenous awareness on the UConn campus, the Storrs campus itself.
I want to add, Chris, that, I think that those of us, connecting in these platforms, absolutely, it is beyond Indigenous peoples, like National Indigenous Peoples Day or a statement or an acknowledgement, but it starts there, right? It starts by having that acknowledgement and working with community, with the Native and Indigenous community on creating change. So one of the things, so I left UConn and I'm currently at a K through 12, I'm at an educational agency that has a K through 12 school district. And, obviously I came, with higher ed kind of like mentality and asking all these questions that they're just like, no, we're trying to figure out these kids and the families, so I'm getting a lot of like pushback and resistance. However, I don't say pushback and resistance, but it's like, looking at me with like, Elsie, you have two heads, like asking for these things. I ask questions like, do you have a land acknowledgement statement? Do you celebrate Native and Indigenous, Heritage Month in November? Do your families do you have a field trip to the Mashantucket Pequot Museum, with the students? And it's like, no. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we have so much work to do, right? And it's really about folks, that learn, right? Where we should be, right? I consider myself still, I am an ally of the community and still learning, right? So I open up, I go into spaces where, I am connected with folks like Sage and Harmony and Chris and Adonis, and I ask questions and I show up and and you do that work, right? And then you bring that with you everywhere that you go. Like when Sage goes, to work, she's going to ask these questions, right? So this is going to follow her. All the students that are participating in NASA and NAZP and this program right now, we'll learn something about what it means, right? To have those stories and those families and these individuals be recognized and have a sense of belonging. And I think, bringing that with you along, has growth. Look at Chris now could turn people away and say, sorry, I can't do that program or I can't teach that class because I'm booked, right? It's just one of him. He's going to have to get many apprentices to the Akoma Educational Initiative because it's needed. And I would add that, when it has a national platform like that, it really does create urgency for school districts, urgency for school leaders, urgency for town officials, right, to ask those questions. And I know that a couple of years back, the Black and Latinx studies for high school students was something they voted on here in Connecticut. And now, we have folks, the Asian American individuals, fighting at legislations for those studies to be added, right? For Native and Indigenous studies to be added into the curriculum for students K through 12, for those things to change. So I do think that although it could feel very performative at times, it creates an urgency for the right folks to come to the table and really continue the transformation that we need in our society for this work.
I will say that I think like in terms of national recognition, it really helps, especially as a student here at just trying to get university level recognition. I mean, I was communicating with other student groups this year who reached out to us weeks in advance of Indigenous Peoples Day saying, we want to wish you a happy early Indigenous Peoples Day. So stuff like that too is just very warming, and you feel like you're actually visible for once. And I think that marks progress just as much. Also, I think, we really cherish Indigenous Peoples Week and Native and Indigenous Heritage Month and the powwow here at UConn. And it's really great when folks come out to these events, and, we appreciate it so much. But there's also something special about folks who want to uplift Native and Indigenous culture outside of these recognized holidays. And I think that, of course, it's amazing to feel honored on Indigenous Peoples Day, but it's amazing to feel honored every day, which is not something that, most of us Indigenous folk can say happens. So the national recognition just really helps bring awareness. And then I think through that awareness, individuals can bring it back to local communities or local universities or local individuals that they're in contact with. And there's something really special about just, feeling like people care to a certain extent. So that's all I had to add.
Great. Thank you, three. Were all really great answers. We're going to kind of come to the end here by way of thinking forward, right? Thinking about the future. What might, and of course we're speculating, but what might the future look like for Indigenous peoples at UConn? And what can UConn students do? And what can UConn as an institution do to make our school a place where Indigenous students can thrive? I know you all have like really smart responses for this one, so we've got a little extra time.
I'll jump in first. When it comes to the future of UConn, I mean, there's already pieces of it that are being unraveled today, which is the land grab CT, and I won't steal Sage's thunder on that and let her talk about it. But pay attention is all I can say to that. Because the recognition of that history, what it does is it makes us realize that actually the existence of many of our public universities, and even a university like Yale University, which is mentioned in the Connecticut Constitution, are there on lands that were, dispossessed, from Native people, and exist, in benefit of that. And, so one of the things that the colleges, UMaine has already taken this step. They were kind of forced to it because in the Maine Constitution, there's a section that the state of Maine won't print anymore, but still says is in power, which hands over all of the duties and responsibilities from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts through the treaties that we had with the Commonwealth to the state of Maine. And one of them has to do with education. And UMaine is a land grant institution as well. It wasn't agriculture, it was forestry up there. And as a result, UMaine has honored for the past close to 20 years now, free tuition for Native students on campus, and it's only right, that would happen because historically many of these environments, colonial educational environments, have excluded or been difficult, almost on purpose, for Native people to navigate. And one of the biggest things that keeps Native people out of higher education is the cost. And if we can eliminate that as a way of thinking about the historical, righting the historical wrong and finding equity, that would, to me, be one of the most amazing things if UConn were to recognize its status, its history as a land-grant university, that it exists at the expense of dispossessed Indigenous people's land, and that one of the ways to get equity back with the Native communities is to offer not just the federally recognized tribes, but the state recognized tribes here in the state of Connecticut, the ability to get a higher education without the $50,000, $60,000 of debt that I walked out of UConn with.
I guess I can jump in. As Chris mentioned, I have a team that I'm a part of called Land Grab CT. Website officially launched today on Indigenous Peoples Day, so it's been a really awesome day. I can drop it in the chat. But just, acknowledging the histories outlined in websites like that, and also on the larger scale, Land Grab U, which is where we drew a lot of our inspiration from. Just acknowledging those histories or not acknowledging those histories on behalf of administration at land-grant universities really goes a long way. So I think, this project is a prime example of an attempt by our team to get UConn administration talking. This university exists in part due to the Morrill Act, which I'm sure a lot of people don't even know what that is. And I think just, going in depth and actually taking the time to learn that, and then coming back and realizing that the University of Connecticut still receives these funds today, and where are those funds going? I can tell you where they're not going. They're not going to Indigenous students, but other universities across the nation have decided to do so. So I think, the future of UConn specifically, I want to credit largely to our new Indigenous faculty having the willingness to join us at a university that perhaps doesn't have the most resources or support, but we're growing and, we're trying, and they're a huge part of that. And then the other part in my eyes is as a student who's done this work for so long, I would be happy to hand it off to administration. I feel like it should not be the duty of the students to do this work. It's hard, and we have Sammy here, who I won't put on the spot, but she's up and coming, and we're super grateful for her, but it should not be her responsibility. It should be admins who should feel the need to provide resources and support and invest in our communities, and also maybe take a look at where these Morrill Act funds are going and where they could go. So that's another thing I'm passionate about largely, is reparations in the form of tuition waivers, which Chris mentioned. I personally thought I was going to go to UMaine. In fact, my entire life, that was just seemed the most reasonable. It was free, and it didn't happen. So I think, I decided to come here, and hopefully one day Connecticut will be able to do the same.
I echo both of their sentiments, Kaylee. So that's one of the things I know Chris and Donis and Sage and I have talked about this before. We were so excited when we saw UMaine and all their signs and all that work, and that was something that we definitely in our minds, right, and in our conversations, we were dreaming for. We're aiming there.
Yeah, absolutely. UMaine is doing some really incredible things in terms of Indigenous representation, and NACP is taking notice, and we're nudging. Maybe one day we can get there. To have language signs and to have a language program and tuition waivers. That would be fantastic. Okay, that is all the questions that I have for the panelists, but I would love for some of our audience to either put some questions in the chat, or we can, maybe have someone, raise their hand and we can unmute them.
I just want to offer my thanks. This is Sandy Grande, to the amazing team, to Sage, to Chris, to Kaylee, and Elsie. It's wonderful to just come to a place, even though you guys were like, oh, we could have gone somewhere where there's a lot more going on. It's really the energy that's here that I think all of us have found really compelling and endearing and welcoming. And we just have nothing but thanks and indebtedness to all of you. So we really appreciate it. I just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Sandy. We do have a question in the chat. What do we see as concrete next steps, and how can faculty assist in this process? That can be for any of our panelists.
One of the things I would say is don't sleep on the fact that Sandy Grande is now at UConn. It's a beautiful thing. You know, I am such a fan, Lord knows, and she and I are definitely like-minded in a lot of ways. And so if you're looking, I don't want to put, you know, the spotlight on her as the native faculty member to always go to. Those, please don't do that. But I will say that, you know, when she does take the lead, pay attention to that. That would be one of the pieces of advice I would add to it. Sage could probably speak a lot more to the current faculty environment and what could be done.
Just want to echo Sandy's awesomeness real quick. If you're a student here and you have the opportunity to take a class with her, definitely take advantage of that. We're certainly lucky to have her. To any non-Indigenous faculty, I would kind of echo what Chris says and really use your platform to showcase these amazing new faculty we have here. If you're unsure of an Indigenous rights topic or Indigenous history, but you want it in your classroom, perhaps, you know, it doesn't hurt to ask. I mean, I know our Indigenous faculty are super busy, but it doesn't hurt to ask to make sure that our histories are being portrayed in a positive and correct way. As far as a student perspective, honestly, at this point, just I feel like a broken record, but representation is key. If your department can, you know, invest in using their platform to uplift and promote NACP or NASA initiatives, that would be amazing. Just getting the word out that these spaces exist, because unfortunately, I mean, as far as we have come, it's unfortunate that there are some students who probably still don't know that we are here. So any sort of representation, that's the best advice I can give.
What I would add is one thing that I have struggled with consistently, and that's, I don't know if you remember this, Chris, but when we were in school, in our history books, you know, like, you know, the Native American information was in like a little text box, you know, on the side. It's siloed. It's like, oh, and this, and then you keep moving on. And I think what I would encourage us to continue to work on, and I say us because I'm definitely willing to stay connected with you all, is threading, right, the historical facts into all of the history that we teach at the university and in higher ed, right? I love that there is a cohort and this is amazing, but I think that it can help, right, to Sage's point, to spotlight faculty members that can help with the history and the information, raise that awareness in a way that is threaded through what we're teaching in all of the university, and not just, oh, sign up for a minor or sign up for a major, right? That's one thing if you want to specialize, but I think everyone should be in front of these faculty members, you know, and they should see and learn that history. I don't want to say the word mandated, but it should just be threaded in all of the work, in all of the curriculum.
Yeah, no, I would also just put an exclamation point on the administration paying attention. I mean, Elsie, you know, you have been, you know, the common thread through all of it, you know, in our alliance with Eggemont and UConn, because of your connection to the administration. And that connection, I know it was very valuable for us as students at Dartmouth College, doing things like moving the powwow right to the center of campus on the big green. It was a very difficult process. The college fought against us actively to do that, but we had administrative people in very high places that were willing to support us, and we got it done, and we ended up feeling much more included. You know, and Elsie's efforts, I just don't want to gloss them over. They do not go unrecognized in this space. Elsie, you have been, you know, probably the biggest force in the administrative side and during your time there in getting movement to happen. You know, where where at one point I wondered if it ever would, and look at where we are now. So I give you all the props in the world for your efforts.
You're too kind. Too kind.
We're coming up on 7 o'clock almost, and I don't want to keep you all too late. Is there maybe one more question from anyone that wants to ask it real quick before we log off? Okay, well, thank you everyone again for joining us. Thank you to our amazing panel, incredibly smart and passionate and dedicated people who are really doing important work inside and outside of the university. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here and speaking with us. Good night to everyone.